Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be deep diving into my step-by-step protocols on how to improve endurance for Hyrox performance. I'm going to break down everything you need to know about endurance training for Hyrox so that you can maximize your endurance potential on race day. Okay, first up we're working on Alactic Power. Now this, I'm going to be using a sled, but you can use any of the ergs, the ski erg, the rower, even sprints or hill sprints if you want to do some running based Alactic Power work. So we're going to be working as hard as we can between 5 to 10 seconds, and then we're going to take a 2-minute rest and repeat. Now this is all about power, Alactic Power. It's all about quality of work over quantity of work, which is why we need 2-minute rests so that we can recover, replenish those power creatine phosphate stores, and then go again. Next up, we're gonna increase the work a little bit and decrease the rest period. So now we're gonna work on Alactic Capacity. So our ability to produce power, but repeat it over and over again. Here we're gonna use the air bike. I'm gonna go for 10 seconds on, and I'm gonna take a 50-second break for 10 minutes, and that's gonna train our Alactic Capacity. When you're doing this sort of work, just like Alactic Power, this is the capacity side, we want to control wattage because that's our measurement of power. So we want to maintain a nice high wattage throughout every single set and reduce that rest period. So you're training the ability to produce power repeatedly. You can do this on any erg, ski erg, rower, air bike, burpee broad jumps, wall balls. The most important thing is those work to rest ratios and the intensity of the effort. Next up, we're going to move on to the rower, and now we're going to work on Lactic Power. This one, we still want to work really high intensity, but we're going to extend that piece of work for a little bit longer. We're going to go as hard as we can for 30 seconds with a 2-minute break, and then repeat that again. Moving on to Lactic Capacity. Now this one is very demanding. It's all about how well you recover. This is like Lactic Power, but now our ability to do it repeatedly for longer periods and longer sets. We're going to stay on the rower, 45 seconds of hard max effort, and then we're going to take double the rest period, so a 90-second break. What's really important when you're working on Lactic Capacity is that we want to have a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio. So if we're working for 45, we take 90 seconds break. When you do this work, you want to work as hard as possible, and that doesn't have to be just an erg. You can do this in a strongman circuit or a Hyrox simulation based circuit. What's the most important thing is that you work as hard as you can and you take a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 work to rest ratio. Okay, so the next one is going to improve your VO2 max. So in order to do that, you have to establish some baseline, do some testing and see where you're at so that when you train, you are working in the right intensity and the right zone. So this is aerobic power. This needs to be continuous or 1-to-1 work to rest ratio based work. Let's say if you are going to do some running, you have to work really hard for 2 minutes, and on your 2 minutes of recovery, it needs to be what's called active recovery. So then you want to bring the intensity down to approximately 50% of what you were doing on your running. Now, again, that could be done on any erg, it could be done in any sort of cyclical based movement where you can monitor your output and then bring it down for 2 minutes at approximately 50%. So conditioning for Hyrox. Now there's a big misconception that Hyrox is just an aerobic sport. If you just consider the time frame, then yes, maybe so. But in fact, it's a mixed conditioning sport. You have to utilize different energy systems at different points within the race. And that will be dependent on your overall race time and how long you spend in each station. So let's go through the 3 main energy systems that are used in Hyrox so that you can improve your endurance for Hyrox, so that you can run faster and smash through those stations. So first up, we have the adenosine triphosphate phosphocreatine system, the ATP-PC system, also known as the Alactic system. Now this is all about high intensity. So intensities, max intensities of 90 to 100%. So we're working as hard as we can. So typically lasting anywhere between 5 to 10 seconds. So we're talking sprints, we're talking plyometrics, we're talking heavy weight training, we're talking power efforts on the bike erg, ski erg, rower, explosive high quality efforts. So this system heavily relies on oxygen to get you going, but then once it's depleted, you then need long rest periods to allow that energy to replenish. So again, the key here is max effort work, 90 to 100% of your maximal effort, and then extended long rest periods. Next up is the anaerobic glycolytic system, also known as the lactic acid system. This is moderate to high intensities. We're looking at sort of 75% up to 95% of max effort, and these efforts will last anywhere between 10-15 seconds up to 2 minutes or so. Now, predominantly, this fuel source to power this sort of work comes from glucose, okay, so carbohydrates. If you want to do real good quality high intensity work repeatedly, this energy system system, then you're going to need glucose in the system, okay, in the muscles. So if you're following a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, it's probably not the most sustainable to do this sort of work. Carbohydrates are a must in your nutritional approach if you're going to do this anaerobic glycolytic based work. And lastly, we have the aerobic system, which is low to moderate intensities, 2 minutes and longer. So think of those steady state runs, long cycles, long slow swims, anything that is sustained at a low intensity, a low heart rate that you can do for long extended periods of time. So that could also be a recovery walk. And because it is of a low intensity, our primary fuel source with this sort of work is fats and a little bit of carbohydrates and a little bit of protein as well if you're working for long extended periods of time. So for Hyrox athletes, generally we use slow steady state runs or cycles if we need to do some off-foot conditioning, or we can put you through a aerobic capacity style circuit where you go through multiple different exercises at a very low intensity. Your aerobic capacity is your foundation to everything. In Hyrox, if you do not have a good aerobic system built, you're going to struggle to deliver the oxygen to the working muscles when you train and when you compete. In between these power bouts, if you want to do real good quality power bouts and repeat power bouts, in those rest periods, the aerobic system works to allow you to recover. Like I said, if you don't have a good aerobic capacity, a good aerobic system, you ain't going to be able to do these systems sufficiently and well. So we need to make sure that we develop this system primarily, because it's not just the base of our energy system development, but it's also the base of our health. Okay, if we want to sleep better, we want to recover better, we want to train harder, faster, longer, more frequent, we want to have less injuries, a better body composition, so you want to lose body fat, build muscle tissue. Without a good sufficient aerobic system, you ain't going to improve. So focus on developing that aerobic capacity. So we have two energy pathways: aerobic, which is dependent on oxygen, and then we have the anaerobic systems, which are independent of oxygen. So here we have the anaerobic alactic system, and then we have the anaerobic lactic system, which is here. All three energy systems have two parts to them. They have the power side and the capacity side. So when you're training the power side of that energy system, you're working on those shorter durations, higher intensities, and longer rest periods. When you're training the capacity side of those energy systems, they're a little bit longer in duration and a little bit shorter in rest periods. So let's look at the anaerobic side of things, independent of oxygen to start. You've got the alactic system and the lactic system, okay? Both of these systems have a power and a capacity side to them. For alactic power, we want to be able to produce as much force and power as possible, because the goal of the alactic system is to be able to produce as much force, power, and speed as possible. So this is things like your 10-second sprints, it's your hill sprints, it's your plyometrics, it's your jumping, your twisting, your bounding, and your sprints on the ergs. So anything between 5 to 10 seconds to train that power system. So when it comes to alactic capacity, that's a little bit longer in duration. So it's 8 to 12 seconds of work with slightly shorter rest periods. Now this alactic capacity is our ability to produce that power, but do it repeatedly over multiple sets. So we're trying to improve our ability to recover in between rounds and resynthesize ATP at a faster rate. You could be doing 10 seconds of maximal effort work on an airdyne and then taking a 50-second break. Now the key for alactic capacity is to have incomplete rest periods. Okay, so power with incomplete rest periods. So the next energy system, still part of the anaerobic pathway, is the lactic acid system. And again, that has the power and the capacity side to it. The power side, 12 to 20, 30 seconds of work, really high intensity. The capacity side, 20, 30 seconds of work, up to 2 minutes of work. Obviously quite similar in terms of the efforts and the durations. The key there is the rest period. So obviously for power, you want slightly longer rest periods. For the capacity, slightly shorter. So say if you want to train the lactic power side of things, that could be a 200-meter sprint or a 30-second max effort on the rower, followed by a 2-minute recovery. The objective of this lactic pathway is to maximize ATP production via anaerobic glycolysis, which is why we need carbohydrates, glucose dependent, we need carbohydrates fueling those efforts. So you might be able to get away with a few sessions doing it on a ketogenic diet, but you're not going to last long, you're not going to recover well, and you're not going to get great adaptations to this sort of training because it's anaerobic dominant. We need glucose in the bloodstream and in the muscles. If we want to train the lactic capacity side of things, generally still very high intensity, but more of a moderate to high intensity. Like I said, 75 to 95% intensity or so. We want to have more of a 1-to-1 to 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. So let's say if you are going to do 60 seconds of wall balls, you may want to take a complete 60-second break. Or if you can do 60 seconds of rowing or ski erg, we then want a 60-second break. So the objective of training lactic capacity is to produce and buffer lactic acid in the body so that we can maintain high intensity efforts. Lastly, we have the aerobic system, which is dependent on oxygen. It also has the power side and the capacity side to it. Let's say if we're going to train the aerobic power system, that's sort of like the transitional zone going from anaerobic to aerobic. So right on that borderline, the harder end of aerobic, the aerobic ceiling. So that could be, say, a 5-minute tempo run, which is about 85%, with a 1-minute recovery 5 times. 25 minutes of total 85% intensity work when you're running. So training the aerobic power system is going to teach you how to use oxygen at higher intensities without going into those anaerobic pathways. So typically, aerobic power is between 85 to 90% of your max heart rate, or if you know your VO2 max, it's sort of that 80 to 90% of VO2 max. That's that sweet spot there. It's important to understand that when you're training the aerobic power system, it's not about max intensity, it's sub-maximal. We've got to be able to sustain those efforts using lower heart rates and efforts. So training aerobic power, we're going to increase oxygen uptake, we're going to improve cardiac output, which is great for lowering resting heart rate, improving blood pressure, and it's going to allow us to improve our lactate threshold. Then we have aerobic capacity side of things, which is anywhere from 2 minutes upwards at lower intensities. So now we're looking at that sort of 60 to 70% intensity. For a beginner, it could be 30-minute easy runs. For a intermediate to advanced athlete, it could be 60 to 90-minute runs, or it could even be recovery walks and recovery cycles. So training the aerobic capacity, you're going to improve capillary density, increase mitochondrial density, and improve fat utilization. And that's because fat is going to be your primary fuel source when you're dependent on oxygen and training that aerobic system. So you guys can see here, I've summarized the energy system intensities with their ratios. Just again, to clarify and summarize what we've gone through so far. 0 to 10 seconds with a max intensity, you're looking at 90 to 100% ATP PC stores. There's no anaerobic, glycolytic, or aerobic energy coming when you're doing under 10 seconds of max intensity work. The longer duration you go, obviously the intensity drops. You can see here this sort of point here where we go from using ATP PC pathways to using none. Okay, that's sort of 2 minutes to 3 minutes of work, 0% coming from ATP PC, 40 to 60% coming from carbohydrates, the anaerobic glycolytic system, and then 40 to 60% being used aerobically driven, right? So fat and carbohydrate stores. The harder you work, the shorter you need to work for, the more ATP PC systems you're using, and then it's trending down to this way, 100% aerobic base when you're doing sort of 1 hour and over at low intensity. Here you're looking at sort of like your sprints, your sled pulls, your plyometrics. Here you're looking at your sort of erg intervals, 30-second intervals, 2-minute intervals, 3-minute intervals. Here you're looking at sort of tempo runs, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 10 minutes of work, 1 hour plus, pure aerobically driven. So let's go over how I put it all together in the off season and in the in season. So when I work with my hybrid Hyrox athletes, it's important that we train multiple energy systems at different times throughout the year. The key way to do that is individualization, knowing where someone is at and where they need to go. We do lots of testing and then we plan accordingly. With the testing and through assessments, we can see where they're lacking and see what they need to work on so that we can then sort of plug the gaps and plan to go forward. So to test alactic energy system pathways, where the objective is to test raw power wattage, I may get them doing like a 10-second sprint on the air bike or the rower or the ski erg or any sort of erg. And they're gonna look at the wattage, okay? Wattage is a measurement of power when you're using ergs. Or if we're in the gym, it could be a broad jump or it could be a vertical jump, and we're gonna look at peak power. If I wanna test their ability to repeat those short bouts of power, then I may get them doing a repeat sprint ability test, or I may get them doing 6 sets of 10-second sprints with 60-second breaks on the rower, and then we see the difference and the drop-off over those 6 sets, and then we plan accordingly. If we want to test their anaerobic glycolytic system, which is also their lactic acid system, where we're testing their ability to repeat high-intensity sprints or outputs via anaerobic pathways, then I may get them doing a 30-second Wingate sprint on a bike, or if they're out on the field, I may get them doing a 400-meter max effort time trial, or a 250-meter row or ski erg max effort sprint. It's how well they can produce anaerobic pathway energy in that period of time at extreme high intensities. Then for aerobic capacity testing, we're looking at VO2 max, we're looking at aerobic threshold and sustained performance ability. It could be a 12-minute Cooper test, it could be a 5K time trial or a 2K rower effort. But let's go back to what I said I would take you guys through and how I break up the season for my Hyrox athletes. Simplified, we have two different phases, right? We have the off season and we have the in season. So when we have the off season, it can be anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks up to 12 months. This is where we're trying to build capacity, we're trying to build strength, we're trying to build our aerobic level of conditioning. Some of the sort of training methods and qualities that we can work on: aerobic capacity, aerobic power. We may want to dip into a little bit of lactic anaerobic training as well, right? To improve our VO2 max, right? So using those anaerobic systems a little bit. We also want to improve skills and techniques of, wall balls. We want to work out which sled pushing strategy to use, sled pulling technique to use. And it's also an opportunity to work on injury prevention and our overall health, right? So like I said, you might have 8 to 12 weeks in the off season, but it could be 12 months or more. We may be working on losing body fat so that running is easier. We may be working on building muscle tissue if you're going from a Hyrox Open to a Hyrox Pro so that you have more functional mass to use on those stations. And then when we get to the in season, that could be anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks or more. If you're considering doing, 3-6 months of multiple different races. Here we want to get a little bit more sport specific, right? So it's about performance optimization. We're trying to maintain our aerobic capacity once we've built it, right? Once we're in this zone. Then we want to continue developing aerobic power. And then we want to start dipping into lactic power, lactic capacity type of workouts. We want to mimic race specific intervals, right? So it could be 4, 5, 6 minute run repeats with 4, 5 minute rows and skis and 2.5 minute sled push efforts, etc. And then a big key, and my favorite training method for my guys and females, is to work on power endurance. A really cool way to improve high intensity efforts, power, but the ability to produce and repeat those efforts repeatedly. Just to summarize and finish off, we're going to look quickly at the work to rest ratios involved, because the work to rest ratios are probably one of the most important things. I said earlier, the 3 most important things are the intensity and the effort that you produce, the duration of that effort that you do produce, and then the rest period that comes with that, right? Because if you're producing really high intensities for the right amount of time, but your rest is too short, you're not going to be training this power system. Or if you're working on the aerobic system and you're within the right intensity and duration, but your rest period is like too high, you're not going to be training as efficiently as you can be. Quickly, here are the 3 energy systems again summarized, all right? We've got the Alactic ATP system, PC system, sorry. We've got the anaerobic glycolytic system. Then we have the aerobic system. The intensities decrease 90 to 100% of max effort, 75 to 95% of max effort. And then we have a sort of 50% up to 85% of max effort for aerobically training. The duration, of course, increases as well with the intensity decrease. 5 to 10 seconds to train the power systems. 10 seconds up to 120 seconds to train the glycolytic lactic acid system, and then aerobically 2 minutes up, 2-3 hours or more if you're a marathon runner or ultra marathon runner. All right, it's continuous work. Again, we have the work to rest ratios, power side of everything and a capacity side to everything. Power, take a photo of this, use it in your programming. If you want to train the power system, it's 1 to 10 to 1 to 20 work to rest ratios. That could be a 10-second max effort sled push followed by 100 seconds of rest, or 200 seconds of rest. Okay, now if you want to work the ability to produce those efforts multiple times, those rest periods get reduced from 1 to 6 to 1 to 8. Again, it could be every minute on the minute, 10 seconds on, 50 seconds break. That's a 1 to 5, 1 to 6 work to rest ratio. The types of training for this: sprints, plyometrics, fast explosive sled pushes, sled pulls, burpee broad jumps. It could be any really high explosive movement done at max effort that you can just cyclically do. Anaerobic glycolytic training, 75 to 95% of max effort, 10 seconds, 20 seconds up to 2 minutes. 1 to 3 work to rest ratio to a 1 to 5 to work the power side of things. For the capacity side, 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 work to rest ratio. So let's say we're going to do a female, a 200-meter sprint effort on the rower. It should take you approximately 45 seconds. If you take a 45-second break, you aren't working the anaerobic glycolytic system. You're actually working the aerobic system because it's a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. If you want to train the lactic acid system correctly, 45-second sprint row, you would then need a 3-minute break, 2.5 minute to 3-minute break to train the anaerobic glycolytic power side, or a 1.5-minute break to train the capacity side of your lactic acid system. Okay, so this is your ergs intervals, just Tabatas, your 400, 800 meter sprint repeats. If you're training aerobically, 50 to 85% of max effort, 2 minutes upwards, a 1-to-1 work to race ratio to a 1-to-3 to train the aerobic power side of things. Or if you want to train the capacity, it's 1-to-1 continuous, okay, steady state runs, aerobic based circuits. Just to summarize, it's really important that no one energy system is working at once all by itself, right? If you do power intervals on your rest periods, your aerobic system is working for the energy and ATP to recover. Okay, now if you're working anaerobic glycolytic or aerobically, those energy systems are also working, but just at a lower percentage. Okay, you can never truly just train one system. There's ratios that change depending on the activity, the intensity, the duration, and the base of work that you're doing, right? So if you're doing a Hyrox, competition, there's multiple energy systems. Yes, predominantly aerobic because you're working for an hour or 50 minutes or 90 minutes or 2 hours. But every time you go into a station, you're working these systems, especially this one. So carbohydrates, hydration, work on the aerobic system, work on manipulating some of these systems so that you can develop your ability to buffer and produce lactic acid, and then go again, go again, go again. But work at the right intensities, durations, and rest periods depending on what you want to work on. So there you have it, the complete breakdown to energy system development to help you improve your endurance for Hyrox. Make sure you guys use all of this information today to structure out your plans, your workouts, so that you can progress properly and not break down, not get injured, not overtrain, and so that you can have good energy and recover really well. If you want to dig deep and dive into training, Hyrox, hybrid, strength and conditioning principles, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out some of my other content. I've got lots more coming up this year, so stay tuned. And of course, if you need any coaching from me, go onto my landing page, check out what I do, and then hit me up and we can book a call and see if we're a good fit. Catch you on the next one.